Good morning, gentlemen. I'm looking forward to our speaker this morning. Our speaker is Dr. Paul Moore, an outstanding pulmonologist and even more outstanding MBA parent. Dr. Moore is a graduate of Vanderbilt University and Harvard Medical School. He also completed his pediatrics residency and pediatrics pulmonology fellowship at Children's Hospital in Boston. He joined the faculty of Vanderbilt University School of Medicine in the Department of Pediatrics in 2001 and went on to become the director of the Division of Pediatric Allergy, Immunology, and Pulmonology Medicine in 2009. The most recent U.S. News & World Report survey of the Children's Hospital ranked their division as number 10 in the world. He's father to 11th grader Joe Moore and 12th grader Stuart Moore. His topic today is one that I hope you'll pay attention to. It's a relevant one for us and a very and we are very fortunate to have Dr. Moore, one of the experts on this topic, to speak to us. So please help me welcome Dr. Paul Moore.
Thank you for that introduction. Next slide. Whenever I give a medical conference or start things, I always start with a case, and this is a case of a 15-year-old young woman, not a Harpeth Hall student, but is a young woman from Middle Tennessee, who a few days just had onset of cough, shortness of breath, headache, shortly after vaping. She was taken to a local emergency room where very shortly she had a breathing tube, she was intubated, had a breathing tube put down, put on a mechanical ventilator, transferred to our intensive care unit at Vanderbilt, and shortly after arriving at Vanderbilt actually had to be put on ECMO, which is heart-lung bypass. She was that sick. Next slide. And so I'd like for you just to see, what she looked like on the inside. Many of you here are probably familiar with a chest X-ray. On the middle of on your left is a normal chest X-ray. The spinal cord goes down the middle. The heart is what's in the very middle. And then, as a lung doctor, black is good. We want to see air. We want to have air exchange. For those of you in biology, you have the alveoli where there's 150 million alveoli where gas exchange occurs. You want to have good gas exchange there. So black is good. But as you can see on the right, this chest radiograph was very abnormal. So we then proceeded to get a chest CT. Next slide. On the top, again, you can see a normal chest CT, and there's 3 images going from top to bottom in this patient. And again, as a lung doctor, black is good for air exchange. And you can see that almost all aspects, going along the bottom row in this patient, you can see that all aspects of this young woman's lungs were affected. It makes you think of some kind of diffuse process, and you wonder, how on earth could vaping itself, how could vaping cause such diffuse lung injury? Next slide. We then performed a bronchoscopy. On your left, you can see a normal airway going down and looking in the left and right. And I hear the murmurs. You can see as we went down, we saw a very burned, scarred airway. This is from our actual patient. And on the right, your right, you can see the blood clots that we had to fish out of her lungs. Fortunately, this young woman survived, but her lung function is about 50% of normal. So because of potentially a poor decision she made, something she'd been doing for a while, she actually was lucky to be alive and has, unfortunately, long-term lung disease as a result of this. So some of you may be saying, Dr. Moore, are you trying to put a fast one over on me? I mean, those are the guys who go and buy vaping, buy their e-cigarettes from people behind Guitar Town or behind Walgreens, and they go and find the shady person and dump that in what they're, but I buy Juul, so I'm okay, right? All right, so next slide. Let's talk a little bit about, next slide, and advance again. So you guys already know this, but for your teachers, for the faculty, there's a lot of different ways that you can deliver e-cigarettes down into the lungs. There are open systems that have these great fumes like I had on the earlier slide. There are closed systems like a Juul that have these pods. They have these flavored pods that are for you. And then there are all sorts of things that I'm sure by chance you might be able to order on the internet. Things that your parents might not think look like a computer disk, or that they might look like other things. And so there's a lot of different ways to deliver things to your lungs. Next slide. this is the prevalence of e-cigarette use in the United States in 2019. And my understanding is in talking to the administration before this talk is that informal surveys suggest similar numbers here at MBA. As you can see, going from 8th to 10th to 12th grade, that the prevalence goes up. And I think by 12th grade, at least nationally, close to half folks have suggested that they've taken e-cigarettes. And I think what's probably most concerning to me is that bottom row. If you look at the folks who are daily users of e-cigarettes. Now, why is that? I mean, why are people hooked on it? We'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. What's interesting was in this same survey, now I'm sure this survey was not by the scholars at MBA, right? These were the public school students of Davidson County or from elsewhere, but I'm sure the MBA scholars were aware that e-cigarettes and Juul contain nicotine. But 2/3 of your colleagues in the United States were not aware that e-cigarettes contain nicotine. So people are just not aware of what's in the e-cigarettes. Next slide. This is just a reminder that, that e-cigarettes, these are the 6 most popular brands in the United States. All of them are owned by Big Tobacco Company, right? They're all owned by Big Tobacco. So that should be a wake-up. You probably look back at your parents or your grandparents' generations and think, how stupid were you to smoke cigarettes, right? I mean, it's obvious that cigarettes, they're noxious. You're around somebody who smokes. When I have somebody who comes in the clinic with their child with respiratory disease, you can smell it on their clothes. I mean, it's just a no-brainer that cigarettes are bad. But unfortunately, Dr. Boyd, I hate to tell Dr. Boyd, but it was actually, these flooded the U.S. market because of research that was done in the United Kingdom. And in the United Kingdom, I know. And in the United Kingdom, unfortunately, in the United Kingdom, there were surveys saying that if we got people off cigarettes, that these e-cigarettes were going to be safe and they were going to be better for us. And so that's how they were originally marketed. But Juul and the different makers, Juul owns 75% of the market in the U.S. They very much realized that the target audience was you. Right? The target audience was adolescents, college students. They recognized that there was a great market. So are they safe? Next slide. So unfortunately, some folks have had challenges in using their e-cigarettes. And so these are true thermal injuries. This is a reminder that the different cartridges, these different delivery devices, actually heat up to 350 degrees very quickly. And so if something goes wrong and they explode, and there have been deaths just from people, not even talking about the thermal injury to the lung, but just external burns due to these. Next slide. So what are in e-cigarettes? Well, to start with, in order to heat up the liquid, you have to atomize the metal. And there's heavy metals both in the sheath as well as in the coil. And so you can see here just the different heavy metals that are there. Next slide. So you think, well, what's the big deal that those heavy metals get aerosolized to my lung? Well, as it turns out, your lung is your most vascular tissue in the body. Remember, that's where we exhale carbon dioxide, we inhale oxygen. So as a result of all that heavy metal being inhaled into our body, it winds up in the brain, in the liver, in the kidney, all of our internal organs. For people who use e-cigarettes, heavy metal elements are found in all of your internal organs. I'm not sure you want that. Next slide. So when we talk about the ingredients, there's 4 main ingredients of the actual e-liquid. First of all, it's the suspension. What is it that helps? Is going to help deliver the e-cigarette. Second is the flavoring, marketed again to teens. Third is the actual nicotine content. And then 4 are other quantities. Next slide. The 2 main carriers for e-cigarettes are vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol. About 90% contain those. And as you can see on this slide here, these have actually been designated by the FDA. If you drink these things, they're okay. But in actuality, if you aerosolize these things, they cause toxicity to your lungs. Next slide. These are the common flavoring chemicals. There's about 150 different flavors that are out there. All the ones that are bold-faced on the slide above are carcinogens. They're known carcinogens. Next point, and the two that are highlighted in red are the two that are in 90% of all cigarettes. Next slide. And so if we look at the common flavoring chemicals, some of them are there for this theatrical, we're about to have theater, for the theatrical effect of seeing the plume and seeing the smoke. But a lot of the other flavors have actually been associated with toxicity. There's one in particular that's actually resulted in what's called popcorn lung. Back in 2000, it was noticed that people who worked at popcorn butter factories in Missouri, that over 50% of those folks developed severe lung disease. They developed scarring of their lungs. The same thing is in the flavoring for e-cigarettes. Next slide. Besides the flavoring, besides the e-liquid, is nicotine itself. And that's a whole nother talk, beyond what I'm going to talk about today. But it's just a reminder that nicotine is particularly potent in terms of its effect on the adolescent brain. It also is very addictive. So next slide. When we talk about e-cigarettes, in terms of the nicotine arms race, when the e-cigarettes were first introduced in the United States, they had about the same amount of content as a pack of cigarettes. But the makers of Juul very quickly realized that if they increased the nicotine content, that people would become addicted to them. And so most Juul pods contain the equivalent of smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. A lot of cigarettes, right? I bet most people didn't realize that. Next slide. These are an example of just some of the different Juul pods that are available and the amount of nicotine that's available in these. Next slide. We talk about airway toxicity as a lung doctor. There's just so many effects on the lung. They affect the ability to clear particles. They lead us to having chronic lung infection, leading us to have pneumonia. And the last slide is, I guess, how I want to end up today, is the impact on youth. They're more popular than cigarettes in use. I mean, the good news is, cigarette use, combustible cigarette use is down in the United States. In the most recent survey, how many does it say up here? 8% of high school students, high school seniors, were using these cigarettes, but a quarter now are using e-cigarettes. It's a gateway. Because of the high nicotine in e-cigarettes, you're actually more likely to go on and smoke cigarettes and use other drugs if you start with e-cigarettes. So anyway, that's my talk for today. I hope this shares with you some facts just to make you think about, for those of you who are using these cigarettes on a daily basis or have tried it or want to experiment. I just wanted to give you some facts just to think about. There's these few cases of folks who've had terrible lung disease. There's a handful of folks where it's blown up on it. But for everyone else, it's all the heavy metals, chemicals, and all the other things you're ingesting and inhaling into your lungs. So anyway, it's food for thought today. Thanks for your attention today. Good to be here.